announcement from the NBI events desk. May we please start the session? Thank you.
Shall we just use the one mic, the roaming mic? That's easy.
Yeah, but because we've got a speaker here, so if we are going to be speaking, the frequency.
Is this better?
Yeah, just wondering if you can just.
Anita, you want to come over? Sure. So I'm just going to do the, after Puri starts, we'll just, it's a conversation, it's a dialogue, and one-on-one. Some of you have experienced it before, so very, very informal. It's more discussion. We will capture the outcomes of the discussion, and we always write it down in a white paper format, which reminds me we need to record. Is that okay? I'll put my phone on. Sorry.
So we're going to use the same mic? Oh, okay. Oh, you can hear me. Okay. Good morning, everyone. I hope everyone else had a smooth ride coming in here. I unfortunately was dropped at the green side, so I then walked over here. But it was fine, just a bit of a different walk. But thank you very much for all being here. I know everybody's got a very busy schedule, and I mean, looking at you, Shamila, over the last 2 weeks, it's been hectic here. And we want to try and make sure that we get as much done as possible. And so I think looking back at, COP25 in Scotland, COP26, in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt, and then here, COP28, it's important that we're ensuring that the voice of the Global South is also coming into this. And because we know that people in the Global South are the ones that are most impacted by sustainability, well, the impacts of climate change. And so we need to ensure that in all that we are doing, that we are ensuring that we have a just transition across. For us as NASPERS, ensuring that we have a just transition is an important pillar within our strategy. And so it's important to us that we can ensure that everything that we're doing is in line with sustainability. When I look at just some of the founders that we have in our business, they think globally, but they're acting locally. And so with everything that we do, we are thinking globally, but we are acting locally, because with each solution that we come up with, it is impacted by the local legislation, the local policies, the local energy mix. I mean, just listening to Pragya the other night, speaking about 2 food deliveries that we have in our portfolio. One happens to be in a country, I just don't want to say it specifically, one happens to be in a country where it's a smaller delivery business than another delivery business that we have. But the one in this other, the smaller delivery business, is impacted so significantly by the energy mix of that country that the costs of being able to transition are much higher, despite it being a smaller business. So we need to ensure from that perspective that we are able to deal with these issues in a manner that ensures that everyone is brought along, our communities, our legislators, that we're all on the same path. But with that, I'd really like to thank you for being here, and we look forward to a really fruitful discussion. Thank you.
Thanks. Yes, I'm sure I can be heard. Thank you so much for being here. We'll keep this very informal and very much like a community dialogue, because that's the only way we will ever achieve real inclusion in the dialogue and in the discussion that is so critical here. What would be great is, especially for the first time when I bring a question to you, if you can just introduce yourself, the organization that you're representing, and then of course bring your perspective out. So actually, I was going to start with you, Arvana. Thank you so much. We had you last year at our panel as well. Very similar theme, if you remember. We are trying to keep emphasizing on this very critical aspect of climate action by corporates. What I'd love to learn from your perspective is, where do you stand on your climate action journey as a financial institution? What do you see are your biggest challenges and focus areas? And here, if I may deviate a bit from the question that we had shared with you, is, you're very much in the middle of bringing capital to businesses who are looking to transition. So what is your experience, and do you see appetite in your clients for that transition?
Sure, thank you, and it's a pleasure to be here, so thank you for the invite again. My name is Arvana Singh, and I head up Sustainable Finance Solutions within Nedbank's Corporate and Investment Bank. But I'll speak specifically to the group initiatives as well as the capital, as you've asked. So we are a leading commercial bank back in South Africa, and we've been known as the Green Bank for a very long time, having a track record and legacy of really giving back and caring about the environment. Now, as time has gone on, this has definitely evolved into a space where we actually understand that the risks of climate change can have significant impacts on ourselves as a business, but on the communities in which we operate. And therefore, back in about 2019, 2018, we adopted a purpose to use our financial expertise to do good. And part of the doing good is really the climate action piece. And we look at it through 3 levers, the one being our corporate social investment philosophy, where we actually, through our foundation, have now adopted a Nedbank green economy investment philosophy. So all of our foundation money is being effectively allocated towards green economy initiatives. Secondly, through our actual operations. So we are a bank, we've got a massive head office and branch network, and we employ a lot of people. So through our buildings, we basically have converted them to green buildings and GBCSA rated, so Green Building Council South Africa rated buildings, whereby all the materials that we use are actually much more greener, from cement to bricks, etc. And then thirdly, through our biggest lever being our financing lever, where we have been pioneers in the early rounds of the government's Renewable Energy Independent Power Producer Program, being one of the largest lender into that in the earlier rounds, and we consistently support that. we've also started an embedded generation business. So, a few years ago, the government actually released the cap where corporates in South Africa can start to generate their own energy without necessarily getting a license. And that has basically allowed us to go in and fund corporates and allow them to actually spend the capex to put up their own solar plants, for example, and to actually generate for their use. So the products that we've innovated to support this are the likes of green loans, sustainability-linked loans, green bonds, sustainability-linked bonds. And we ourselves as a bank, we've done our 7th green bond issuance this year. So we're totaling close to 10 billion rand of green funding that we've raised from the capital markets, and we're intentionally using that to finance the likes of green residential buildings, renewable energy, green mortgages, et cetera, et cetera. From our client side, we are effectively engaging with them on their transition journeys. And if you look at the loans that we've been able to deploy to them, it has really been an education and awareness in the sense of these are the risks associated with climate change. This is how it could impact your business. And this is the type of financing we think you need to start engaging in, because it'll help your business, but also start positively impacting things like your ESG rating, which has positive effects for capital, equity, and debt. And effectively, we've been able to get good buy-in. We've grown that sustainability-linked and green loan book to about 15 billion rand, coming off a base of 0 2 years ago. And effectively, some of the sustainability KPIs that we embed into that relates to reduction in scope 1 and scope 2 emissions, or reduction in scope 3 emissions. But we recognize that we need to go at the pace at which it's practical for our clients, and we need to go at the pace that will ultimately provide environmental and social outcomes. So we very much believe in the just transition. It's an important part of our philosophy, and therefore, in 2021, we became the first bank in Africa to publish an energy policy. And what we did there is we said we need to glide down our exposure to fossil fuel activities by 2050. And at the same time, in parallel to that, earlier this year, we released our Sustainable Development Finance lending ambition, purpose ambition. So by 2025, we'd like to have 20% of our gross loans and advances committed to sustainable development finance. So we see the climate piece, the climate action piece, as well as the social piece working hand in hand.
Thanks. So building on the fact that your loans and your financing is supporting a range of corporate actors at different size levels, I think I'm going to move to you, Joachim, if I may. In terms of climate policy and frameworks and standards, how do you see there being attention for recognizing the local contexts? Because clearly there will be a difference for corporates working in South Africa versus corporates that are in Germany. So enabling policy, and do you see a role for it, and what's been your experience?
Thanks a lot. So I'm Joachim. I'm working at the World Benchmarking Alliance. We assess how multinationals, large companies are aligning with the SDGs. And specifically in the climate and energy team, we look at both how they align with a low carbon pathway and also their commitments on the social side and just transition. And I think it's really important what you mentioned because there's not the same pathway for each company. So that's definitely something we assess on the climate side, for example, depending on where the assets of the company are based, company-specific characteristics like its financial capacity to transition. But also recently we've looked a little bit more into, as you were saying, what is the enabling policy environment. So we published a brief with the Grantham Research Institute and the Council for Inclusive Capitalism. What we show there as well is that it's really important for corporates to have this locally defined, but to think of a just transition, not just ending in terms of the workforce of the company and the direct operations, but thinking also about the whole value chain, because I think the concept is now grown in the sense that it's also understood in terms of the impact on local communities, human rights due diligence, and sort of the downstream impacts that companies can have, including in jurisdictions where maybe there isn't so much just transition legislation. So what's interesting, and we mentioned this in the brief, is that there's a number of standards that are coming up and that address these the climate, but also the social element. So I think that's something that may grow more. For example, in Brazil, it's maybe not purely just transition, but there is an ESG racial equity index. So I think that's also something to take into account. What is the, some of the inequalities that can happen when you talk about a just transition? Who has access to these green jobs? There is also legislation in the EU with some, disclosure requirements and just transition there. And also, as I understood, there's discussions about a just transition taxonomy from the Treasury in South Africa. So I think in many jurisdictions we're seeing how do you define the just transition? How do you ensure that investments go towards projects that are, aligned with the local priorities for a just transition? And also what we do is we engage with the companies to understand how they are viewing this, because some companies, like electric utilities, for example, have maybe already transitioned from more, say, heavy emitting assets to lower polluting assets, but that doesn't mean the just transition journey stops there for them. There's also the need to understand in the manufacturing of their low carbon products, what were the, how have their suppliers, respected labor standards or human rights due diligence. And so it's a really complex issue, I think, that, does not stop even once the company has transitioned. And of course, keeping in mind the local context you mentioned.
I think I could not but come to you, Stuti, with this, because we're talking about local context and just transitions and really making sure that we leave no one behind. And the DREC initiative is really all about leaving no one behind on the energy access, specifically enabling energy access. So I'd love for you to share a little bit about the DREC initiative, and also what are the, do you see corporate buy-in? Do you see what are the type of corporates that are being able to pick it up? And what do you see as a larger impact of something like the DREC? And I think you have some news to share with us as well.
Hi, everyone. I'm Stuti Dubey. I am the Executive Director for the DREC organization, which is now the DREC organization. We have matured from our initiative days, which was essentially about product market fit. What we have achieved in last 3 years is 280 gigawatt hour commitment in 8 years. And we are talking about 20 projects in more than 8 countries. So highly contextualized, very localized. And this is spanning from India to Haiti to Nigeria, Ghana. So we are just talking about the whole global south. What we have seen is that through DRECs, these projects have been able to achieve additional revenue of more than $7 million, which is a lot, because every time we talk about climate finance, we are talking about how do we get these climate finance initiatives to work. And these, the 7 million plus that we are talking about has actually come from corporates. So what we have been able to demonstrate is that corporate climate action is extremely successful, is doable, is contextualized for the local communities. So that would be my short introduction of the DREC organization. So coming back to your first.
Explain what DRECs are. I'm not quite sure everybody is fully well aware of it.
Yes. So starting with DRECs. So DRECs are basically energy attribute certificates, which are issued as IRECs. And these are completely adhered or complied by the Scope 2 and Scope 3 standards of GHG protocol, and also to the likes of SBTi. So DRECs are essentially a market instrument, EACs, Energy Attribute Certificates. So yes. So from here, you would like me to pick what we have been able to achieve in case of committee level action.
Yes.
Okay. I would start with process and NASPERS. So what we have been able to demonstrate is how corporate action would actually translate in terms of contextualization with PayU India. So PayU India is a portfolio company from Naspers Process, and they have been able to uptake projects from India for their scope 2 claim. And what we are talking about, these projects that are at community level, which actually translates to what these communities would like to achieve. So energy access being the first problem that we are addressing, then it could be something as simple as relate to agriculture, it could be education, it could be healthcare. So all the additional SDGs that are more aligned with the corporate that we are talking about. So any corporate that we look at, they have their own preferences. And when we talk about distributed renewable energy small scale projects, we are talking about where they come from. We are talking about mini grids, we are talking about solar home systems. So we are talking about action on ground at grassroots levels.
And we're very, very proud to have been the first ever corporate to be off-takers of your REX,
Yes,
D-REX.
yes, thank you for that.
It was an initiative, we've been supporters of this initiative for a while, and it was quite a long time coming. It took up to, as you know, innovation and disruption always takes time. This took a little bit longer, but we really look forward to seeing how you scale up, because this is really where you add additionality of social impact to climate action. And rather than just buy cheap RECs from large energy products, projects, this is really impacting the poorest of the poor very often, and that's where we would like to see the just and fair corporate climate action coming in, really.
So just to quickly add on to it, what we have also experienced that corporates are ready to pay the premium price when they see that action actually translates to the end beneficiaries. So I see that there is a huge opportunity for all of us to bring in more and more corporates here. So, yes.
Well, thanks. Talking about grassroots level action and how that, I have to come to you, David, a little bit. We talked about it before as well. In your scope of work, how have you seen various companies and businesses really take up their responsibility on waste management, on the work that you're focusing on? And what do you see as the biggest, is there a divide between the Global South and Global North companies, and are there bridges to be built?
Yeah, thank you. Actually, I'll pick up on a couple of the themes that we've heard already this morning. Thinking globally and acting locally is something that I think is really important. So first of all, I should say that I'm from RAP. We're an international non-profit that works on the mission to try and address climate change through the food that we eat and the products that we use. So the other half of the story from energy. We're based in the UK, Australia, and the US. And we work all the way around the world with businesses. So we work through something called voluntary agreements, sometimes called food pacts or plastic pacts. And I'm pleased to say we have an excellent plastic pact and an excellent food pact in South Africa with our partners Green Cape and the Consumer Goods Council of South Africa. So giving them a shout out. And we bring together corporates from the global brands like Unilever, Nestle, Coca-Cola that you would know, as well as the key players, national retailers and manufacturers in each country that we work in, and agree a set of targets, take really careful measurement, identify what are the big impact actions that we can all take, and what's the enabling environment that's needed, what's the local policy context, what's happening, what are the supply chains like in that country, what is the formal or informal waste sector like in that country, and bring businesses together so that they can take action. And we're really pleased to see that through this mechanism, we are able to reflect what's happening in each country, but also to learn from each other internationally. So there's so much that we can all learn from each other. Things that in the Global North we've forgotten how to do, which people in the Global South are innovating all the time and helping us to learn. Another way around, we can share things that have progressed in one place that may be relevant in another. And we've seen some great exchanges between South Africa and Chile and India, where there's similarities in the informal waste sector, for example, and people can learn from each other. And by having this global focus and local context and sharing this information, we're seeing that action can happen quicker and quicker. And one of the things that I've been particularly pleased with in recent years, during the pandemic years, where we weren't able to travel, and we thought that perhaps momentum would stall, but we saw that the businesses really actually pushed us and said, no, we want to keep moving. We want to keep pushing forward. it's really important to the sustainability of our business as well as our planet. And you know, people who work in businesses are humans as well. They see what's happening to the planet, and they wanted to push on. So we were able to see increased momentum actually in our work to tackle plastic waste and food waste and the impacts of the textiles industry around the world, launching new initiatives in Kenya and India and in Colombia and Mexico. So great to see that there's more and more countries coming together to share. And what seems to be a common theme here is the businesses have similar challenges, but the local context makes it so much more difficult to deal with in some places. But actually, by being able to show, look, this happened in this country, and this was the enabling policy that allowed it to happen, and this has been the benefit, and look, money's flowing through the economy and jobs are created, and we haven't stopped people living their lives. That's been able to influence in other countries. So we've seen great progress in convincing the Indian government to allow recycled plastic to be used in food products. And we've seen changes in the taxation system in Chile, for example. And businesses right across the world taking literally billions of items of plastic that would have been on the market and would have gone into the environment out of that environment and putting it back into circulation or eliminating it completely. So it is possible. I think that corporates are doing a lot. They're taking their responsibilities seriously, and that global thinking with that local context can be a really powerful way of having action and also sharing that. As you mentioned, we can bridge that gap between global north and global south by working on the same challenges that we all face and sharing our experiences together.
Well, thank you, David. And as you know, we're NASPERS and our group companies in South Africa are all signatories of the Plastic Pact. And last week, we also signed up in India, and Swiggy, one of our businesses, food delivery businesses, there signed up. And we remained firmly committed to scaling sustainable packaging. More on that later. Dimi, I'm going to come to you, if that's okay. If you could share a little bit about Talabat, and then, Talabat is operating right here where we are. I've seen the scooters run past me this morning as well. I was very impressed. At 7 a.m., there were food delivery happening. It was great for business. The more deliveries, the better. But where we are based is also traditionally a massively fossil fuel focused economy. How do you see this transitioning from a corporate climate action perspective? For businesses such as yourselves to set science-based targets, and now I know that the Delivery Hero team has set science-based targets as well. So it would be really interesting to hear your perspective on this globalized, vision and focus, but localized implementation.
Thank you. So, I'm Dimitra. I lead sustainability for Talabat across 8 markets, actually. So we're in the GCC minus Saudi, Jordan, Iraq, and Egypt. So very, very different markets. So I'll focus on this one for now, in the UAE. So I think this has come up a lot, and also I'm sure in the news on, a country like this also hosting COP, right? So there is that controversy, but I do have to say that, been living here for around 12 years, and I believe they're one of the countries that can action things the fastest. So I think it's only about them getting the right business case, I would say it. So this is how we tackle it at Talabat. We know where we live and we know the challenges, but I think, for me, I don't position it as a sustainability angle. I position it as cost efficiency. That's my angle in everything, and that's there, whether you're a fossil fuel in a country or not. Everybody wants to save money, right? So I think starting with the basics of showcasing these business cases, which to my surprise in most cases are not top of mind at all because it's so easy and so cheap. But the reality is, in 5 or 10 years' time, if you, structure your business case in a specific way, the business will see that there's value, right? So even going from, we operate dark kitchens, for example. So even in there, we had no one, it wasn't really, let's put in, any kind of lights. No one really cared, right? But, you give them those pieces of like, hey, this has worked in other places and it can work here and it can be cheaper. So I think business imperative for me is the foremost focus, right? I think that afterwards, if it's doing good, then that's great. I think another topic and very close to our hearts are EVs, right? Why do them in this market, right? There is no real push. At the same time, though, I think it's, the technology in many parts of the world is now becoming even more financially viable and proven. So I think, when you put it down in numbers, actually, it does make sense, even if, fuel here is relatively cheaper than in other markets. So I think we're just trying to get it in the angle of like more long-term sort of financial sense. I think it helps that we're part of a larger group like Delivery Hero, where there are, we are a publicly listed company in Germany and therefore have those obligations as well. And then thirdly, I would say, I think here, even though they're very fossil fuel focused, I believe that they care a lot for the well-being of their people, right? And I think they see that this is something of a priority, and whether it's pride or whether it's other reasons, they want to be at the forefront. So that's why. Thank you.
So actually, that brings me to the SE for All representation here, Anita. What is net zero? It is the domino impact of everybody converting to renewable energy and using renewable energy. But everybody is where SE for All comes in. So I'd love to learn from you, a little bit more about what are you seeing as the big barriers that are currently in place, and how is SE for All? What's the long-term strategy? You have a great CEO. So, from the longer-term strategy of ensuring that capital flow keeps going to the countries, and specifically in the end companies. I think, Ivana, you were talking about how capital flow is really important for businesses to be able to transition, and that can be done, discounted from SLLs, sustainability-linked loans, green bonds, but from a country level as well. How do you bring that closer? And I'd love to hear your views on that.
Well, thank you for having me. It's great to be here. The conversation has really been stimulating, and I'm learning a lot and seeing so many points of connection and synergies. So my name is Anita Sharma, and I head the Strategic Engagement Unit at Sustainable Energy for All. And we were started as an organization affiliated with the United Nations about 12 years ago. And now we're an international NGO to continue the mandate of SDG 7, which is access to reliable and affordable energy for everyone, including the hardest to reach areas. So with about 700 to 800 million people not having access to reliable energy, and now in line with the Paris targets for 2050. And I think sometimes we are focusing so much on how we get to 2050 and not realizing that we need to reach 2030 first. So we will not have a just transition if we don't reach the targets and ensuring everybody has access to energy. And part of, so let me just say that this is my first COP, and it's a circus, but it's also the conversations that I have been a part of and hearing. I feel that there's a lot of optimism, and it's kind of a make or break situation, especially kind of the location being here. So all of that being said, I think there's some great advancements that have been made over the next couple of days. Obviously, so much more work needs to be done. I think I did see an EV Lamborghini yesterday, so there is a market. There's a market for it. That's not the market that we work in with Sustainable Energy for All. But I think there's a false kind of choice between decarbonization and development, right? And so it's not an either or, it is an and both and. And with SC for All, what we do is work with partners in the developing world, including governments, including the UN, including the private sector, to try to advance and help to create the markets, as well as with governments, including the regulatory frameworks that they will need. So in terms of thinking about the DREC work that we had been doing or supporting and the opportunities around results-based financing and creating those kind of markets, especially for what we had found were kind of small industries and even kind of individuals who had kind of a small shop. At first, we were giving them kind of, or helping create kind of standalone systems, but then it wasn't necessarily for their homes. They actually wanted it for their businesses. And then once they were able to have their own capital in their pockets, they were creating them for their homes. So just kind of creating that enabling environment. The other thing I would say is, in addition to the international advocacy work that we have been doing at SC for All, our CEO, Demalola Ogunbi, is from Nigeria and has seen firsthand on the continent just how important it is to decarbonize and do it in a way that, for example, women have access to clean cooking solutions. So, you know, the food that women have to prepare is also what's unfortunately killing women at disproportionate amounts. So how can we kind of create the incentives in the business markets for clean cooking solutions? I think one of the things that was said earlier on carbon markets, I think one of the breakthroughs here this week has been kind of creating the both the integrity and the science-based targets to enable kind of the markets. Sorry, I know I'm not answering your full question. And I guess the last thing I would say was at an event yesterday. Well, I'd like to invite everybody to the SDG 7 Global South Pavilion at 2 o'clock. I believe it is at 2 o'clock today. I'll just double check. Allied Climate Partners will be launching officially, and the role of Allied Climate Partners is to help facilitate bringing capital and bankable projects kind of to the market. So kind of being that conduit or helping to play that conduit, therefore there could be, did I lose? Okay. That there could be access there. So I'll just leave it at that and we'll come back to it. Thanks.
Super, thank you. That SBTI reference almost makes me want to go there, and I will come back to you. You know, we talked about this as well. But Shamila, you know, your ecosystem of businesses is so vast, and considering the context, you know, we talked about, you were talking about a minute ago about, you know, not just climate action has to be balanced out with the necessarily local social impact as well. How do you see that panning out in your ecosystem of companies in South Africa?
Thank you, Pragya, and thank you for the invitation for being here. I think firstly, I just want to make the general comment about gratitude to NASPA's process for holding the conversation on the divides north-south and where that opportunity is to bridge that gap. It's not one that we often explicitly have in this context, and I think I'm grateful that you've brought together those players, Pragya. Thank you. In relation to our businesses, as you can see, the NBI obviously has a number of different sectors represented in our member base. And if I have to look at where the businesses are now, I think we need to consider different stages firstly, you know, different trajectories. We've got businesses of different sizes, and that is reflective of the country as a whole. If you have a conversation now, and I always get super excited, I've been CEO just for a few months, so I go tell people about all the exciting projects we're doing, and you sit down with the CEO and they're like, that's great. My immediate concern is energy security. And that's the temperature in the country, by and large, right now. We're going into a context where we've had massive energy security issues. Of course, aligned to that, there's national security aligned with energy security. And so right now, the short-term focus is on just securing energy, and I don't need to explain that, you know, in South Africa, of course, we've got a big fossil fuel base of energy. But in parallel, that effort to start making sure that we're decarbonizing, because longer than the short term, of course, is that need for the economy to transition anyway, and that needs to happen. And so we're starting to see some of that come through. There is a massive business effort, of course, to work together with government out of necessity right now because of the precipice that we find ourselves in. But hopefully that spurs more engagement between governments and business, and that I'm bringing that in to answer part of your question because it's reflective on a bigger theme of we're not going to be able to go this alone. And particularly when we bring in the social context, like you're talking about, Pragya, this is something that no business is going to be able to do on their own, and no government is going to be able to do on their own. If we look at what's required in relation to the transition, it is a whole economy transition, but it is also a whole mindset transition. Add to that that South Africa has the difficulties around unemployment inequality and unemployment inequality. This morning, my mind is dead. But we've got these massive challenges already. If you look at our unemployment statistics, we're looking at close to 60% youth unemployment, for almost 40% overall. So the transition has multiple things sitting as a weight on that bridge. And so the conversation between civil society, business, and government is a critical one. What is really exciting, though, is that we're seeing that coming together. Yesterday, the Just Energy Transition Implementation Plan was discussed here on the Pavilion, and at least we're seeing this plan. There's a plan, there's something happening. We've got focuses on 3 sectors. We're looking at energy. Of course, we've got to look at transmission and changing that, but we've also got to look at the new part, right, which is the new energy vehicles and the and also green hydrogen as part of that. And of course, cross-cutting is the skills portion. So if you look at what needs to happen there, if you're going to be able to implement anything on the just part, and we follow the Presidential Climate Commission's framework, we're talking about elements that we refer to as restorative, distributive, and procedural justice. These are not easy concepts, because what we're trying to do is at the same time ensure that this change that we know needs to happen and a move to a low carbon economy happens in a manner that also starts to restore some of the injustices of the past in South Africa and a deep-rooted inequality that we have. So if the transition happens in a way that doesn't take people along and aims to directly address those challenges, there's not going to be a transition that is fit for everybody. And so whilst we're talking about business, the social element now is going to be front and center for business to do. The how, of course, is making sure that that engagement happens in a meaningful way, and there was lots of conversation about that in the last few days. Are there the right structures and the platforms to ensure, and who decides what is just in a transition? Who decides that? It's the person who is affected, and is there space for that voice to be recognized and for them to be able to define that for themselves? And then for us to work together to ensure that the mechanisms we put in place and the interventions we put in place do that. So the transitions are going to be multiple. There are also massive opportunities for business because it's a reorientation of an economy, and it's looking at that. But the way we need to look at it is going to shift. And what you're also starting to see is a great, not starting to see, it's been there for a while, a willingness of business to say we want to be part and parcel of it, but we can't necessarily run all the structures on our own. The social engagement, for example, needs to happen. The support from that we need to see coming through the climate finance is part and parcel. So it's a massive picture that needs to fit together to mobilize the resources, to ensure we're having the right conversations in the right place, that's feeding back in a way that business can translate into, okay, what action do I take here? How do I ensure that there's ongoing community engagement so that I start with one picture and don't end up somewhere else? And those are the things we're having. So it's not an easy thing. It is quite a complicated thing to do. It's quite complex as well. But what is there is the willingness. And I think we're seeing a lot of action happening in a short space of time. A Presidential Climate Commission coming online, a Climate Bill to an Act which is imminent. Hopefully we'll see an integrated resource plan coming soon. So all these pieces hopefully we'll start creating the picture that we need. And at the same time, we've got financial institutions who will be able to start looking at those innovative instruments to ensure that that money flows to where it's needed. So from a business perspective, I think the willingness is there. It's the how and how we're going to get it done in terms of the just element that I think is really the critical piece. The last part I think I'd like to just finish up with, Praga, is I feel the need for businesses to ensure that they're constantly making sure that the South African context is understood. And that is the same, I think, for many countries in the South, is your context fully understood when you're in that conversation in a global North debate. I come from financial services. If I look at the net zero frameworks that are being set, Net Zero Asset Owners Alliance, Banking Alliance, whatever the case might be, is that are you making an input into the way that framework is constructed to understand or to ensure that it has relevance for our context. Else, again, it's another way in which a framework might entrench perhaps a North narrative that doesn't adequately give space for us to be able to do that. So even with the best intention of commitment to net zero, the practicality in a framework might actually hold companies back. And I think those are the areas for me where business can actively participate and make a difference.
Couldn't agree more, Shamila. And just to share, we set our science-based targets this year. It took us only 9 months, and we had to very, very there was a lot of engagement with the SBTI team, and they actually moved their boundaries because of the fact that it's very difficult to box everything and every context. And Arman, I'm going to come to you very quickly here because as a business, the Science-Based Targets Initiative, unfortunately, even though there is a provision within the Kyoto Protocol for common but differentiated responsibilities for country-level pathways, but there is none of the frameworks, whether it's the GHG protocol, whether it's the SBTIs or any of the larger standards and coalitions, allow for localized context, and we keep talking about that localized context. As a business, as a financial institution that's looking to, very proactively have a strong climate action strategy, how do you see this? Is this something that's limiting, or do you don't see this as a challenge at all?
Yes, thanks. So we're actually in the process of setting our glide paths, and I think I mentioned earlier that we've got an energy policy on fossil fuels. So we've looked at various target setting methodologies and initiatives and various different scenarios. And for our context as a bank operating in Africa and in the global south, we felt that the International Energy Agency 2050 scenario was most appropriate for us to align towards. So we've actually adopted that in terms of the ranges that we'd like to see year on year in terms of that glide down. But to your point, it has to be a range. And we know that the science is evolving, we know that the context is evolving, and where we may find ourselves next year could be very different from this year. So we are giving ourselves a little bit of dynamism. So managing this glide path dynamically is what we would do year on year. But at the moment, this is aligned with the International Energy Agency 2050 scenario, which we felt was the most appropriate path. And this is aligned with the Net Zero Banking Alliance as well. I think it's exactly that in terms of finding those scenarios, testing those scenarios which would be most appropriate for your context. And ultimately, whilst we understand it may not be perfect, being able to align to one of these scenarios which makes sense for you as a business and manage around that, I think is probably the pragmatic approach to take.
Absolutely, but I think, to your point, Shamila, before, that there needs to be a corporate voice built, being heard. Because if you start mapping where all these standards and frameworks are housed, I'm sorry, but you said Australia, UK, and US. I can repeat that for every institution, large, whether it's the SBTI, WRI, the CDP, all of them are. So I do think, I don't know what is the best way forward for the Global South to either develop parallel frameworks that have global recognition, because just between India and China and a few countries in Africa, you're more than 2/3 of the world's population. So do we need to set up parallel frameworks? Do you need to, or do the existing frameworks need to allocate more resources and home themselves in these countries to be able to bring that voice out? Because I think right now there's a massive weight towards the global north, and that localized pathways. I was going to ask you, Joachim, but I've been told we have 3 minutes. Very quickly on, is there an enabling policy opportunity to create regionalized pathways that are more local, that take into context the country, operating country scenarios for corporates?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So maybe I haven't explained it enough in depth, but we do also use the IEA's net zero scenario in how we assess how corporates are aligning in the long run with the 1.5 pathway. But the way that we do that is not going to mean the same level of decarbonization by the same date, depending on the companies. As I was saying, where their assets are based, their financial capacity, and so on. In terms of the sectoral pathways, so there are sectoral guidelines specific to the IEA as well. But yeah, I think that's a key point also in the just transition part, where we have a methodology that looks at basically using the ILO guidelines and assessing how companies are implementing them. And there are different areas, just transition planning and so on. So there are common areas that we can assess. But we're looking actually now to develop more of these sectoral pathways on the equity point, because it's quite clear that if you're talking about EV manufacturing, the just transition job implications are not going to be the same. There are a lot of more spare parts for ICE vehicles, for example. So yeah, that's still something we're looking into. But yeah, it's a really great point.
So, yes.
Yeah, thank you. Just build on a couple of things there, actually. So certainly national roadmaps is a really important way of delivering things, bringing the businesses, and not just the corporates, but also the informal sector to the table and saying, look, what is it like for us, and what does this transition look like for us in this country? But another reflection, we've been heavily involved in the UN treaty dialogue for the plastics treaty. And actually, we've been advising the government of Peru in that, and they've been the chair. So actually, there is a very different kind of feeling to the voices that are coming to the table in that treaty negotiation. And the initial zero draft and the second draft that have come out have reflected very different parts of the world from the normal kind of leaders that you would expect. So maybe there's some hope in that there is a transition in setting those global frameworks that means the Global South has a better voice at the table.
Absolutely.
Is it working? Oh yeah. I was just going to say that when we look also at how companies are planning for a just transition, the term is still very much focused, I think, on coal phase out and the electricity sector. But obviously, there's a key need to address this in a lot of different sectors. And as you were saying, I think the sectoral pathways are particularly important. And we find, for example, that in the electricity sector, there's much more planning for it and less in other sectors. So I think, yeah, moving forward, that would be a really important to look into.
Super. On your very, very optimistic note there, and a very great example of how this can be made more real. Thank you all very much for being here and spending the time with us. You can expect this conversation to carry on. From an Aspires process perspective, we are committed to this. Same time next year, different country, we'll be there, and we hope to see you there as well. Thank you so much. Apologies for being late. Thank you.